Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. On this warm Saturday evening. Now, I'm technically creating this one prior to creating the Mars mission one, but I'm going to do the Mars one. I'm going to release the Mars one hopefully first. Yikes. But as a Patreon, you're going to get this episode. I'm going to actually release the uncut version so that you understand why I cut the episodes. It'll have all the pauses and all the minutiae in between. So we've been covering, tons of stuff, right? From all the space missions to Apollos. We did the ISS. And isn't it funny that the ISS just was announced to be retired 2 weeks after the episode releases? And they released a show on TV to sort of bless the notion of, this is the truth. This is the truth, right? And to the listeners, if you can hear a stupid Star Trek sound in the background, it's a car dealership across the street who thinks it's their right to absolutely annoy the entire city block with this Star Trek alarm thing, just because a homeless guy walks through the lot. Or back when I was a kid, your dad would go to a lot in the middle of the night, and just not 2 a.m. or anything, but 9 o'clock, eat dinner, you go over to the dealership, they're closed, and you're just looking at the cars. But except today, it's all fucked up, right? So anyway, so if you hear that, I apologize. I try to keep that crap out of the soundtrack because I don't want you driving your car listening to the show and think that some emergency vehicle is behind you or coming and desensitize you to a real one in the real world. So I apologize. I'll try to do a noise cancellation on it. But yeah, so the heartbeat of the space agencies is they know that a bunch of us are not buying it anymore. So what they've done now is they've, just after delivering modules to the ISS, they are now announcing it's going to get rid of it. And, they might be getting rid of it because they're going to crash the economy really bad. There won't be enough money to get people on and off of it. So that could be part of it. But they also released a fictional show about the ISS. And it's some spinoff of a Gravity thing, from what I can tell. It's not like it gets ripped apart or anything, but there's some drama on it. Whatever. Might be a good show. I don't know. But they're going to bless that fiction before they get rid of the liability that's out there. Now, of course, how did they get rid of the Mir space station? Well, they just supposedly crashed it, and it burns up over America or whatever, the ocean or whatever it is, right? So we can expect some sort of spectacular event like that to occur. What's really strange is, they haven't had any problem keeping it, in orbit for the last 26 years. So, hey, why don't you just pull everyone off the thing, turn off the lights, shut down the environmental system, and however you miraculously keep this thing in space for 26 years without a decaying orbit, just keep that little part of it on, Nope, going to get rid of it. It'll be interesting to see if the Chinese get rid of theirs. But we've had some interesting check-ins. I just did about 50 comments last night. Probably some serious replies, at least 25, 30 really big replies that I got to give to some of you guys and gals. Some brilliant stuff, man. You guys made me laugh my head off. I swear to God, some of you have the greatest comments. And some of you just gave me some of the most amazing life story comments. And it's just fantastic. People found themselves upside down in life and just somehow owned it. And in one case, a gentleman said his wife's family also believed in him, and the whole world is just perfect now. I mean, as perfect as it gets for any of us. So super cool, super duper cool. But some of the interesting check-ins is that at least 2 of you said you saw the Hasselblad documentary that I mentioned, where the guy that created the camera was asked about the temperature fluctuations that NASA says exist on the moon, being again 280 in the positive Fahrenheit in the sun. And if you whip around and put it in the shadow, it'll slam down over 500 degrees in the negative to around 280 in the negative. It's kind of weird. Most people are rounding it down to 250. That's fine. And the dude said the camera would explode. The other one was, another commenter said, put those rubber gloves on and then try to change film. Try to change film. Good luck. Absolutely correct. I mean, with a little unfolded phalanges, it's still tough and it's delicate, and man, you can break a camera in 2 seconds, especially a Hasselblad, which is, everything is bigger in a Hasselblad of that timetable. One of you did the research on the oxygen tanks inside the Apollo spacesuits, and you did the due diligence to find out that what they said was they had, obviously limited oxygen in this thing. It's about the size of a thermos, like a big thermos, much smaller than a scuba tank, which can only provide about 45 minutes of air. They said they gave them less oxygen while they were in so like a deprived oxygen situation. And he did this due diligence and found out, oh yeah, there's some papers out there that say that under those circumstances for this amount of time, you'd be dead. Plus, there's all kinds of wild stuff like the moon car, the moon buggy, really sucking down some huge terrain. Even if you believe the 1/6 gravity thing, you still are burning up a battery really, really fast. And so it's funny that we now have an EV society and cars are just starting to get to, this infinite battery thing where if you buy like a Rivian for about $95,000, you can have a 400-mile battery tank, right? So the idea that we ever had this battery technology that was so amazing on the moon in 69 or 1969, about 71, and suddenly we make electric cars and they just go, ooh, the first ones especially, right? And then I had probably one of the funniest comments I've ever had in the entire 9-year span of the show. I was telling you about, the Apollo capsule not being able to re-enter on its butt, right? Which is just asinine. The more I thought about this, we're going to get into this for a split second. It is the stupidest assertion, right? If you were to have some bullet-shaped object and you're having the path of most resistance with some, phony baloney blast shield underneath, if you were to try to push that at 17,000 miles an hour into atmosphere at any angle, if you were to be able to put your hand on the back of it, you're going to be like feeling like a wobbly liquid, basically. At that speed, oxygen is going to be a liquid, right? Hence the burning and all this stuff. And the blackout phase on the radio is to hide the fact they're dumping it out of a jet, right? And so I gave you the analogy of testing bullets when I was a kid, of throwing, I think it was a .308 bullet, and trying to get it to explode. And no matter how we threw this thing at this cement wall, it always turned and hit the tip because it's a path of least resistance thing that happens. And the funny thing, the commenter, it's like they pick this one thing and they think that they just in one sentence have debunked all the science, neglecting that. Okay, guy who made the comment, why don't you tell me how big machine learning works? Why don't you name one of the models, data sets, and spaces that a typical basic machine learning algorithm uses, and then tell me which model and data set and space you're going to use to test an angular frictional model of that particular shape into a soupy atmosphere such that you're going to prove to me that this whole thing can actually take place, right? Because that's what the kid at Caltech did as a graduate student. And he put a supercomputer on it as a genius, right? I wonder if the commenter could even get admitted into Caltech. Love to know that. And so one of the most brainiac children on planet Earth that actually called NASA on the telephone, recorded the phone call and posted it on YouTube. He said he ran a simulation for a month. Okay. It's way more intense than your make-believe world of just saying, what the commenter said was, well, they didn't come home on a bullet. They were inside of a lunar capsule. And they had the ability to correct the vector by maneuvering. Okay. One, I have never heard any source say that when that capsule's coming in with the blast shield on the bottom, where we have radio silence, that there's any correction to its vector. The way that it's always dramatized and has been dramatized for 55 fucking years is that you have to get it right or it's not going to work. That's it. Now, think about it. Let's go with the commenter's ridiculous assertion. Where would you put retro rockets or any type of like little fart valve on the thing to correct a re-entry of a path of most resistance shape going backwards with the blast shield? Okay, so the blast shield is non-permeable. You do get that, right? You can't have little retro rockets firing. This ain't Star Trek or Star Wars. You're not watching sci-fi on TV, which is where most of these guys get all their physics education, right? What are you going to do? How would you ever spurt out at 17,000 miles an hour, which is, pretty quick? How would you do it? Hell, I'll give you 1,000 miles an hour. You can knock out 1/17th of the actual speed this thing's coming in. How would you do it? I mean, at least the space shuttle has got tiles on it. It's all explained, and it's coming in on its belly or whatever it's doing. At least that's plausible, right? How much, where's this fuel coming from? You're in a capsule. You're in a capsule. All right, so where's all the fuel? Where is it? You got the top part that supposedly has 3 giant parachutes as big as your house, each one of them, that are packed to the density of bark with no known technology to explode them out of the top of the capsule and get them to unfold. It's easy if you push it out of the back of a 747. As dramatized in, I think, the 3rd episode of Outer Limits in 1963, where they faked an alien invasion. All right. It was just hilarious. Hilariously ignorant comment. I hate to lean into anybody, but I don't think that guy's coming back for more. This is the kind of stuff that, I don't know what it is. You've been a subscriber to Popular Science Magazine for 60 years, or Scientific American Magazine, and you think you have a drop on science, man. You think you went to school all of a sudden for some of this stuff, Weird. I barely had to study when I was in school for science. Physics, most of my math classes, definitely not astronomy. I went to college astronomy, got 103. I never took a note. Just want to say, I called my physics teacher 20 years after I had the guy. He said, "You're my second best student, but you're my best physics student." I said, "Whoa, that's a weird thing to say." Didn't expect that. Wasn't calling, "Who's your favorite, man?" I didn't say that. He just threw it out there. And I said, why would you say that? And who's your number one? I was a programmer kid that was number one. He worked for Google. He was very impressed by that. But he just said to me, he goes, "I hated you in my class, but I loved you in my class because every time I asked a question about anything, you always knew the answer." And he goes, "You didn't just give me an answer." He goes, "You gave me the encyclopedia definition of whatever I asked you. And you didn't have the book in front of you. You just had it in your head." So I've been this way for a very, very long time with great mentors. And all it did was get more and more intense with time, man. So these numbnuts that come in the comments sometimes, and they're very rare, man. I mean, out of 1,000 comments, I might get one dude with a dumbass comment like that. But you can just feel it. You can just feel their thing, I had an interesting video I watched last night I want to share with you. It's sort of on subject, and it's sort of not, but it was interesting, the emotions I went through watching this video. There's a really cute channel on YouTube where it's like tribal people tasting and eating things and experiencing things, and it's some centralized location in India where they have picked 3 sets of brothers. The 2 brothers, the 3 sets of brothers from different families, different villages, they look the same. 2 guys look like Harrison Ford, except they're Indian, and 2 of them look like Kurt Russell, and they're Indian, and then 2 of them look very unique on themselves. And they're the most cordial, at least on the camera, very cordial, sweet, God-fearing people, just so polite. And they eat all this wild stuff, from like delicious stuff to, was it the Pocky One Chip Challenge? Because they like hot sauce or hot peppers, right? But the crazy thing was this episode was about showing them the globe. It's a really gorgeous little, probably 10-inch globe. Very pretty. And they pushed this on the table. And the video had a little narration in the front. And it said some people, or many people around the world, have never seen a globe before. They have no concept for the world that they've been living in, on, whatever, however you like to think about it. And so they show this globe to technically 6 people, to 3 sets of 2. At first, they didn't know what it was. One guy kept calling a soccer ball. It's a painted soccer ball. And of course, they don't really speak English, and the globe itself is in predominantly English, where there's no country names on it. And they're just not familiar with what they're looking at. And so it was like the old story of the Native Americans that were watching the ships approach from the coast, or from the ocean. And they, the old stories were that they thought they were gods. And it was only the shaman that could actually see the boats eventually. But for the tribal people that were there that weren't shamans, which means they weren't as enlightened as the shaman families, but when the human being stepped off the ship, the way that they described it was, it's like you suddenly appeared. And so they said, you're gods. Now, whether that's actually true or not, it seems plausible, right? I mean, how could you conceive of a boat if you've never seen one? But I would think that Native Americans would have canoes and something of that nature, right? Apparently, it didn't have the wheel, but they guess they didn't need it. Anyway, these gentlemen are looking at it. This has to do with sort of paradigms of belief. And they couldn't, initially they said, okay, this is the world you live on. And you saw the circuits in their brains go, what? Right? In their world, they don't live in India, they live in Pakistan. So immediately they wanted to see Pakistan. And they said, we'll try to find it. And India is pretty big, so they were able to find India. And they were not aware that India was so much bigger than Pakistan because of the nationalism that they're taught. And then they couldn't understand what all the blue was on the globe. Well, what's all this blue here? What country is the blue country? And he said, that's ocean. And one guy for the entire episode seemed to really struggle with the notion that this was ocean. Like, oh my gosh, we're just utterly surrounded. We should be able to visit. He's really cute. We should be able to visit everybody, every country, just using the oceans. Not really realizing how massive these continents are. But I know that some of you have completely different beliefs about the shape of the earth. Imagine watching this and let's say you're right and I'm wrong. Expanding earth isn't the way it works. And then you teach 6 people who are going to teach probably 12 people. And it's going to multiply, right? And all these gentlemen are probably in their 50s, at least. And it was just interesting to contemplate. This is the moment they're going to decide where they live. If any of you have ever seen my old episode, Consensus Reality, it really gets down to, what if anything that we think is real is simply nothing more than a consensus reality? That the Mandela effect is nothing more than consensus reality. And that if you had a whole continent of 100 million people, let's say dial America back a few decades, and it's Berenstain Bears. But over in Europe, the frequency is Berenstain Bears. Piece of information gets communicated incorrectly or correctly or whatever, and you start to split the realities. And so when the world starts communicating on a global level, they start being able to adjust things a little bit, right? You're racist, or like Eli Whitney's a white guy from Yale who's never been to a cotton field in his life, but invented the cotton gin because he knew how it worked, right? Instead of, as when I was a child, the irony story of a black man that after doing it several times, winding up cotton with a stick, he figured out, I can make a machine to do this. This is where we are doing that consensus reality slowly but surely in a brute force manner in the belief of science. aren't we? Hey, I saw a bunch of shows on TV from probably the Buck Rogers of the 30s where space had clouds in it, because the atmosphere in the minds of a 30s person, it never stopped. It was clouds all the way up. To adjusting it, so by the time Forbidden Planet arrives, 1956, you have this absolutely gorgeous prop flying in a bed of stars, which to this very day, that shot, given the technology that they had in probably 54 to 56 to make this movie, they blew away the first Star Trek Next Generation, who had these god-awful cloths with really bad stars. When you're ever in 10 Forward or in any of the command rooms or personal residence, the ship's supposed to be moving in space, but instead it's just got this carpet of stars in the background with like light bright things in them. No, the star shot in Forbidden Planet is incredible as you hear that theremin music play. So now we're shaking it out of our system. We had the 60s, we had the 70s, rockets in space, make everything happen. And by the way, we're going to, even though we agree there's no sound in space, if you see a ship without sound in space, you're pissed off at a movie. 2001: A Space Odyssey, got it right. And the movie I could not think of the other day was Interstellar. And then I said Matthew Broderick instead of Matthew McConaughey. Ugh, cringe when I make those mistakes. But he was the only other guy to really do no sound in space. I mean, I think there's a few television shows who've attempted it, but it's just not dramatic. And the other thing is that you get these effects people that it's amazing how fucking stupid they are. They'll do the no sound in space thing, but they'll still have the rocket engines, that are somehow talking to a vacuum. But when the camera gets put back inside the ship, it's still absolutely dead quiet. And it's like, well, if you're going to use your rockets in space thing, 2001 barely ever used any of that stuff. It just somehow did what it did, right? But if you got a big rocket connected to your ship and you're inside and you have an oxygenated atmosphere and there's any type of kinetic transfer of the fucking engine rumble to the compartment you're in, even if you have little sub-compartments in, you'll hear it a little bit. It'll rumble just a tad if you blast your engines. It's just weird. A couple of you, two of you, mentioned trying to get jobs in the aerospace industry. And of course, you're watching my stuff and you're like, hey, I'm with you. I was there before you in some cases. And they're like, I can't get a job in that industry. And it's like, wow, yeah, I never really thought about having ingested this material, creating a sort of a central intelligence, Interpol, whatever, wherever you live, MI6 trail of watching this type of content, and then you go apply for a job in aerospace and you just get turned down flat, not because you're not unbelievably qualified to do the job, but because you're a liability. Imagine that. They see you as a mole inside the organization simply because you can think for yourself. I'll tell you, man, I've dated a girl who's her niece was joining one of those alphabet agencies. Starts with the third letter in the alphabet, and it was Thanksgiving. I've told the story 3 or 4 times, but let's just remind you guys. Dad was a Top Gun pilot. Very rah-rah, which is great. I mean, he seriously was the real deal, man. Just like the dudes in the movie at 85, that's what he was in real life, right? So he's very proud of his daughter. And of course, every parent's like, was my kid going to turn into like one of these kids that lives in the basement or get something done? So the kid's super intelligent. But they asked her, she's been in interviews for like 3 months. And so they said, well, hey, how's your interview going? It's going to be a 6-month process. And all she could say was, well, they want to know what I believe about this. They want to know what I believe about that. And it was all about 9/11. Who did it? How it worked. And all she had to do to get in this agency, get this, was watch the fucking fake news. That's all she had to do. And just memorize it and repeat it into an intelligence agency to get the job. Wow. Fuck, man. I mean, obviously they like her academic capabilities beyond that point, right? We're just talking about a qualification process to get in. But imagine if that's all you need to do is just, it's what Rod Serling said. He called it pre-censorship. It had started in the 50s, which we know was probably a big part of Project Mockingbird, where they bought the press and said, you're going to say what we say now. And we'll give you a little membership to the Council on Foreign Relations. You give that with that, Dan, rather? I know you'd sell your country out. I think one of the other encouraging things is that you have a bunch of us, okay, the majority of us, 99% of us, that have gone through the aperture of being reborn on the other side of the lies. We are now in a brand new world, like a dream, where we are now more in the truth than ever before in our entire lifetimes. And now, one of the other things that occurs to you is, as new information is introduced to you, you have a vetting process that pushes it back. You know, they are talking about a 2026 mission to the moon. Well, gee, what happened last time they said they were going to Mars, they were going to go to the moon? I mean, we're talking manned missions. I told you guys over and over and over again, something's going to happen and they're not going to do it. Something's not going to happen, they're not going to do it. Keeps getting delayed, keeps getting delayed, keeps getting delayed. Well, if you have some event, because we have this old man in America, and probably several times a day he goes to the bathroom standing up with his clothes on, and he is pretending to be someone he has never been. And there's a group above him that you don't know who's actually telling the country how to do what it's doing. Hence, they're tearing it to pieces. And he just did a little debate with another dude, and he just tanked it hardcore. And he tried to kill it the next day and tanked that. He's been tanking. So the word is he's going to get out of the game. But every single person in his group that goes and visits him at his little building he lives in, which is very bright, they come out and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we're back on board. We were very concerned about him before, as they should. But now we're totally on board. Same thing when Magic Johnson said he had AIDS, but he was on the dream team, and all these guys said, oh my God, I'm not playing with the dude who's got AIDS, man. And they all visited his house, and they all came out and said, yep, I'm willing to play, because he never had AIDS. And that's what he told them, all right? So this thing is happening, and now what's going to take place, most likely, is between today and that November date, when this change in paradigm of how this country's run is going to happen, something else is going to take place. Something else is going to take place. I really don't think they're going to hand it back to the other guy, the previous dude, who actually knows what he's doing. All right. So that might just be the reason why you can say, beyond that little cataclysmic moment they're going to create, maybe it's a climate thing, and they're going to do a little bit of Paradise, California, all over the entire world's surface, and blame it on some fake bullshit, and so they know that 2026 is never going to arrive the way that we think it's going to arrive, which is that we're fully capable human beings, able to do stuff. So at least 3 of you over the last month and a half have suggested that it would be great if I could get on the Joe Rogan Experience. But I want to weigh in so that you guys know my sort of take on that whole thing. I think Joe Rogan's a cool dude. I've never met the dude. I think he's a very mellow guy from what I can gather, and I think that he's just enjoying life. And I don't think he takes things quite as seriously as a lot of us do. You know, he weighs in every once in a while, and he's definitely pissed at the same shit we're pissed at from time to time. I think he is governed by success, right? He still has gatekeepers around him. You want your shit distributed, you want us not to attack you. And he took a stance during the last medical crisis we had in the world, but he waited till kind of like everybody got fucked up by the regiment to really say anything. So it's like, okay, Joe, now you can say something. We fucked up, 2.5 billion people in the world. Now you can go ahead and tell them that they shouldn't have done that. Whatever. You didn't disturb the poker game that we were playing. Whatever. I nearly got this channel completely blocked off of YouTube. I released 9 videos on the subject matter just back to back, man. And when I was right about everything because I had good sources, just like you. Out of all of the, how do I say this? All of the contestants, I guess you could say, I almost don't want to say guests. Virtually all the guests on Joe Rogan are very polished, sort of prime time, self-controlled guests, right? What super renegade guest has ever been on that show? I don't think I've ever seen one. Even as a new guy, I've never seen. Oh, it's almost always guys, right? I don't think I've ever seen a woman on that show. But his little posse rotates in and out. But the posse is, for me, what I see, they feel obviously very privileged to be on the show, and they're not about to fuck that up. So they're not about to run out on a limb. And then, of course, there's one thing I can't fucking stand about his shows. They somehow find a way to bring in that outside pressure, you know, where it happens to Trump all the time. It's like, you know, are you really going to say that you believe this? And it's just basically, what you're asking is the exact opposite of the truth. And he's not going to cower down to you, which is why when he was number 45, he told people to go fuck themselves right in the middle of the interview. It's like, fine. Yeah. You're just trying to get him to concede to your bullshit, right? But there's an indirect version of that on the Joe Rogan show. I don't go to someone's house and disagree. I try to stay away. I mean, I was educated quite in my face at the age of 15 by an elder that said, okay, you're going to come over and you're going to eat dinner. And he says, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion. Neither of which I gave a fuck about. But I was like, okay. But he was not smiling. He was looking straight at me. And he was like, that's the rule. And now today, that's everything. It's all anyone talks about is at least the politics part, right? So there's this, you know, it's a natural thing to do, but it's one of these things when someone says, do you think the earth is flat? Do you think the earth is flat? And, you know, you're asking a fair question. But Joe will ask it like this. Do you think the earth is flat? Like, you're a fucking idiot. Now, I personally don't think it's flat, but there's this sort of like, I'm going to ridicule you if you go the opposite direction in this conversation. You can tell what my belief is. I would think you're an idiot if you believe that thing. Do you really think we didn't go to the moon? It's got that fucking thing in it, right? I'd much rather have a person say, dude, you seriously think we went to the moon? Really? I mean, like, we haven't been back in 55 years, and you think we really went? I mean, you think it's weird that the astronauts called the White House and didn't have a delay on the phone? You don't think that's weird? You know? Much rather have that in my face a little more confrontationally than some sort of like, I'm going to sit over here and weasel through my opinion. See, Alex Jones, he knows how to control himself with what his shtick is, right? So he shows up at that show looking at Joe Rogan going, hell, I've been doing this for 15 years longer than you, kid. And so, rough, he's ready to go. Then you got like a Graham Hancock kind of character, right? And Graham is like super polished guy, man. I mean, he doesn't talk about anything that is, one, I think, commonly understood. So when Graham talks, you shut the fuck up because he's got a bunch of really cool shit he's going to talk about. And I think he always delivers. He always entertains. He brings the videos. He brings the photographs. And so, good. Now, I'm sure that a big part of properly producing a show is to ensure that you have someone that is not going to go nuts on your show, right? I don't know that Joe is broadcasting live. I would assume that there's a bit of editing there. But you'll notice that any show that can get like famous people to come on the show on a regular basis, that show is just a screaming archetype of absolutely controlled media. It always is, right? I think a lot of cases like, was it Tim, what is bad pool? That guy, it just feels like just one step over like, CNN. We're going to be a little controversial. We're my little cap on my head, talk a million miles a minute. I definitely have my favorites and I have my least favorites. Substance, man. We got to talk about substance. Things that dig into your brain, that make it think a little bit deeper. Not just, I tune into this channel because it's telling me what I want to hear all the time. I mean, it's like, really? There's reasons why you hung out with the badass uncle that was like fixing a Harley and some old truck. And he would tell you you're an asshole based on the last thing you said. But in the next second, he's like, you want a beer, man? Let's hang out. You know, it's like there's those people, for me, were way more interesting than just a grandmother loved me to death. You know, we never had a bad thing said between the two of us. Those are good too, but for completely different medicinal reasons to the soul. But if you want to grow your brain, you're going to have to get in there and rip some tissue, just like you're lifting weights. For me, when I watch television, like my ingestation of like things on TV is that if I'm choosing the program, it's either a really quality show like Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, which I love with Pike. That's like one of the only modern things I'd watch. Maybe Tulsa King, because I think it's kind of funny. I love seeing Stallone really get a chance to act. But other than that, I am on demand for shows that I think have actually earned their keep in my brain, right? Because I am giving up a part of my life to ingest something. But 95% of my life right now is watching movies made from recorded history all the way till probably 1970. There's so much to catch up on, you know? If I watch anything else, it's because I'm in a room stuck with people that are watching it on TV. And I'm trying to work at the same time. But no matter what, you get sucked into it, you know. I just want to say that so you understand how I ingest anything. But I've noticed that there are, as this new ISS show is releasing here, there are a ton of space shows that have been going for Expanse, I think finally, someone said it concluded in the 6th season. I'm not sure it concluded, but be it as it may, it's like near future technology, but it's there to reinforce whatever paradigm that they want you to not question as they money launder across the top, right? A bunch of you in the comments had some great articulations about the money laundering game of the space program. You're absolutely right. I can't speak for any other country other than the United States because I'm not close enough. There's a lot of speculation as to how China put together their system. And of course, again, it's just funny. It's one of these things, it's like, I'll explain to you the way I see China's space program versus our space program, both of which I think are largely made of fiction. So our space program is, let's just say a dude gets into a pool and you're filming the situation. Dude gets into a pool, swimsuit, and forget about space for a second. And he does the backstroke and he swims and he goes underwater and a certain amount of bubbles come off his body and he has a certain amount of buoyancy in the pool. And then China says they have a pool and their guy is going to get in the pool. But suddenly that guy can stay underwater for 4 hours. No bubbles come out of his body. Oh, he levitates when he comes out of the water. I mean, that's how bad the Chinese space station is. Kim Jong-un's missile launches and stuff like that. The only thing happening to Kim Jong-un is they're just basically, someone's giving him a missile that'll fire so he can create it, probably us. And he fires it and he gets a little bit of like rah-rah from his people as they're all fucking starving to death. And holds the place together. What else are you going to do? Fight when you're, on average, like maybe a foot shorter than every other human being, and you barely can possess a thought that's cognitive because you've been so hungry for so long. I mean, there's just, talk about repressing the people down to some weird Hunger Game, except they don't have enough energy to actually chase each other through the forest, right? It's crazy is when you really add up the metric tons of fiction that is going on in this planet on a daily basis. You have to step back for a second, the 60,000 foot view on it, and say, how are they able to tell people that CO2 actually warms the earth when, again, the greenhouse gas layer index, which is what the NSO organization made, Doesn't have any in it. But it's every chemical in the sky that's responsible for either trapping heat in or somehow creating heat, right? It's not even in there. All right. How are they able to do that? They teach photosynthesis in fucking grade school. Okay, a plant eats this shit and makes oxygen. Pretty cool, right? Maybe you get into high school and you read an article from NASA that says if you have a cubic 10 feet of grass and it's healthy, that will provide you with all the oxygen you need all day long. If you just had a cube, it's 10 foot wide. Now, the problem is you got to keep it perfect, right? Okay, so all over LA, all up and down the 405 right now, they've got these, the word signs that hang over the highway. Extreme heat, stay cool, drink water. I'm looking at extreme heat on the sign and it's 78 degrees outside. Oh, next week it's going to get to the low 80s. Oh boy, that's really rough. Right now it's probably about 68 degrees outside. All over LA. Pasadena probably more in the 80s. Okay. How are they able to do it? The media machine, that's how they're able to do it. And that's how they're able to teach all this crappy science, fake science, so that we have to deal with comments like, oh yeah, you can drive a bullet backwards into the atmosphere and somehow course correct as you come in. That's the word, course correct. Man, you're on level 0, bro. You know what's really strange is I'm going to give you an example of something that you know is absolutely true. And it's so tangible, it's going to make you just itch a little bit, right? You ready? Just imagine if the world simply chose to reduce smartphones down to making a phone call for month after month after month. They uninstall all their apps. Month after month after month. That sector of people that can do that, the system knows, the AI that has been grabbing everything that you do. You no longer use web browsers for anything. Maybe to pay a bill. That's about it. Just a function, right? But you're not giving them any of your opinions, man. And so the system would freak out. The political elite would freak out. Corporations would freak out. They would be giving away phones for free with the apps being put in a state they can't be uninstalled, right? They give away phones for free that just flash that stuff in front of you. They would try to legislate laws that say you have to look at certain fake news channels in order to breathe, you know? If we just pulled out of those paradigms. Never watched anything on TV, but maybe, again, stream an old movie made before these agendas ever existed. They'd pull all those movies out, give you some stupid excuse. The only thing you would get is like a Star Wars series where everyone comes from planet Rick James, right? Some of you will get that. I will acknowledge, and I think I said this in the sort of the NASA feelings episode. What is the old saying about the fastest and easiest and most effective way to brainwash any single individual or group of individuals? Repetition, right? I've been pulling all kinds of models off of 3D models off of NASA's website because I want to render these vehicles as I talk about them, and not all of them are up there, but a lot of them are up there. I'm not going to pay anyone money for it, but when you look at the sheer magnitude of the fake science, and you know what's funny is even if it's a video of, like, I saw a video, this is what I'm talking about, the video that was talking about how all these satellites supposedly land on the surface of Mars, all these ridiculous slingshot landing paths, and it's like, my God, you know, the sheer speed of this thing screaming down to the surface of any one of the bodies in space that you could name besides maybe a moon of some Saturn or Jupiter. You know, Mars is 1/3 the size of Earth, supposedly, right? So you have this thing coming down and it would just be screaming. I don't care if you can maybe cushion, blow up a balloon around it. I mean, it's going to go for, 100 miles, 1,000 miles after it hits. I mean, can it really take that kind of pounding? What if it landed during a storm? What if it landed in the middle of what if it actually slammed into the side of a crater? I mean, they never have any problems whatsoever. They always land in the most choice locations on Mars. You can get to the point you see so much formality around things, and they really do build these rovers and stuff. And, there's a tremendous amount of technology on these little guys, or at least it's the most gorgeous artistic creations of electronics and various inventions, from cameras to sensors to scoopers to solar panels, very specialized solar panels, ones that last 20 years. And you see it, and you see it, and you see it, and then you start to understand. I understand why people think this stuff is totally real without having any proof whatsoever, right? We've never been able to fire a modern rocket from Earth to Mars and take a photograph digitally and transmit it back to Earth, right? As it's going, boom, 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 or big ass memory stick or something, to the point when it lands, it sends the whole trip back. You don't need 30 frames a second, people. You might not need a frame, but every 3 or 4 hours, you could definitely hold that on a big fat memory card. Trust me, the amount of memory I am consuming to make this show right now in 4K is huge, right? Huge amount of frames. So you can do it, especially if you turn on compression algorithms. You can get the whole trip. So you see Earth just vanish, right? Supposedly, if they're able to do this. And quite frankly, as soon as Mars becomes visible in the front cone of this craft, we should be able to see, the course corrections, and Mars moves around a little bit as they try to tighten that orbit. But you can't tell me that with the soupy nature of the atmosphere of Earth, that firing a rocket through this crazy, turbulent, soupy stuff where it's got air pockets and then thick atmosphere, and then of course it gets really thin up there. It just would. And so supposedly your astrophysics, right? Physics is physics, okay. But yeah, you're going to have this thing, and that goes around the orbit of Earth with no extra propulsion, and suddenly gets to escape Earth's gravity. Now it's headed towards a dot in the sky that's like 68 million miles away. And what is it? 1/100th of a degree makes you 2.4 million miles off course. Oh, okay. You're 2.4 million miles off course, and you're trying to hit a ball that's, I guess, 3,000 miles wide. A little less, 2,500 miles wide. That makes sense. So again, they never explain the optic that can see Mars on the other side. There's too much of a delay between, any vehicle in space. Plus, it hasn't unfolded to get all of its, transmission stuff back to Earth really dialed in anyway. And, I'm off course. Okay. I mean, again, 1/100th of a degree, and you're in the millions of miles off. Okay. Well, how do you what kind of fuel you got on board to correct that kind of course correction, that course error? You don't. It's all bullshit. It's complete bullshit. But computer-generated graphics, which I'm using to late in my shows now, it's actually very, very easy with consumer-level products. You can download Terragen 5, 6, whatever, and you can have Mars on your computer in moments. You can have any terrain you can think of, forests, deserts. I mean, you can have whatever you want, man. It's part of their promo. But you get the guy that doesn't know anything about computers, or the last one he had was a 286 at work, and he's coming and going, "They didn't land in a bullet, you idiot." But yeah, just think about that whole thing of the internet being disabled by a sheer lack of use. I want to say too, because obviously I litter my episodes with sort of a pro-Trump doctrine at times, and I think that turns people off, of course, and I'm not trying to do that, but it's chess, people. It's chess. How does chess work? Chess is owned like checkers, right? Checkers is all the pieces are equal until you get, was it crowned at the other side, right? Then you got your Uber checker that can go anywhere all the time, front, back, whatever. With chess, you obviously have different players in the game that can do different things. And the strategies and the kill maneuvers that those particular pieces can do are entirely different from each other, which makes that game utterly amazing. So we're in a game that's in its last few moves, in America especially. So why do I support a Trump? Well, I'm down to I got my king, they got their king. They got their queen, I got maybe my queen. I've got a horse, right? The knight. And maybe a pawn. They got a bishop. And we're trying to beat each other in this game. So I'm looking at the board, I'm going, well, I only got these pieces, and one dude has some swept back hair. He's a little orange. Okay. He seems to lighten up on that a little bit. The king on the other side is just standing there on stage, hunched over, crapping his pants, while his queen is sitting there going, hey, he molested me when I was a child, and now I'm married to him, and he killed his first wife because she found out that he was molesting the kids. He really wanted to marry me anyway, so there's 10 reasons to get rid of the first wife, so on and so forth. And so that's the opponent I got to play against. So unless you can name some other dude who's got billions of dollars at his disposal to do what is right, as opposed to some lobby group that's going to come in and own the dude in 2 seconds, or someone like a Gavin Newsom where he's always been owned. All right. What do you want me to do? What other solution you got, man? Right? I'm not trying to really confront any of you, but I'm just saying that's why I do what I do. This is the only chess pieces I've got left that I'm aware of. Okay, if I got other chess pieces that are better, they're stealthed on my board and I can't find them. I know there was a hope that 45 would actually expose things like the evidence behind the Roswell crash, any type of, ET contact of any kind, recovered ships, even if they're part of our history, like Bob Lazar said. We hope that he would be able to push out the JFK papers. And what's really weird is, Kash Patel, he said that he had seen what was in those papers, and I think what he insinuated was that he understands why they can't release them because it implicates way too many people that are still alive, or at least their dynasties. What a load of fucking horse shit. Worried about hurting the fucking feelings of criminals. That's what that statement's all about. Nut up, motherfucker. Swear to God. But let's say 45 becomes 47. He's never going to be 48. So now, for 4 years, a lot of things can take place. Now, again, there's organizations that believe that they're in control above that role. And it just depends on how many people have sold their soul already as to whether or not that can be course corrected to talk about space programs, what they can and can't do. My concern with 45 is that he is very patriotic to the point of willing to lie to the American people simply to keep the illusion going. Not being interested in money laundering himself, but just saying, well, that's going to do more damage than good, so let's keep lying about it. I don't think he is so stupid that he doesn't understand a lot of the things that we understand about the missions and the physics and a bunch of smoking guns. I think he's probably seen a lot of that stuff, but you would be shocked, okay? Like I said, I had a friend of mine who was a self-made, very wealthy man, very famous man, and he just couldn't handle the moon conversation. But he would lecture in front of college students and say that the trade centers were brought down intentionally, and he'd get a standing ovation from all the students. To witness this myself. Couldn't talk about the moon? Whoa. Really? This seems like it was much less than the other subject matter you just blurted out. And you're right about, well, he's not right about both of them, but he's right about the one he's willing to, concede to, right? Now, one of the listeners made an actually interesting comment, and it's kind of funny. It must be new to the show. But they saw these cigar boxes behind me and said, oh my gosh, and I don't mean to patronize you whatsoever, I'm just being fun here. They said, you are talking about being gluttonous and you've got, I don't even know how much money this stuff is behind me. This is probably easily $100,000 worth of cigars just in the shop behind me because it goes back at least 2 boxes deep. Somewhere in there, somewhere from 70 to 100 grand right behind me here. And it's nowhere near the majority of the sticks in this room. But they said, look, it looks like you've just gluttonly bought all these boxes back here. I'm in a retail location, which we call a cigar lounge. This is a place where people go to buy a single stick or boxes, as you can tell. There is seating over here, and there's a TV on this side, and we will sit there, light our sticks, talk to each other until we're done. Maybe if it's a good movie, we'll get up and get a second stick, and then finish up, pay out, and leave. That's where I am right now. This big box right here is actually full of instruments because the other thing this gentleman does, he has his own instrument business where he makes his own instruments. He's designed his own stuff and pretty incredible. So I'm probably surrounded too by at least 50 trumpets, probably 6 or 7 tubas and xylophones and all kinds of stuff. So it's all brass. There's no woodworks in here. Woodwinds. So just to clear that up, just so you know, I'm with you. One of you mentioned too, this is kind of a little catch-up show, that you can't wait till I get back into a backyard again. And let me tell you, I missed that backyard more than you could possibly imagine. It meant everything. So what had happened was that this is way off subject here for a second. I had rented a house because I just come down from the Bay Area and I had some money on me, but I didn't have the job set up, so I wasn't able to buy a house. Market was actually pretty good to buy too. I really wish I had probably pushed into the other realm, but it was a really tough 03 and 04 because that recession was here. It was killing us, right? But I got a great deal on the place, and over 20 years, I mean, this old woman that rented it to me, she didn't raise it more than $500 in 19 years, right? So it was amazing. I just kept it up. It was really good. Well, she died. And she died during the medical problem we had in 2021. I've told the story a couple times, but yeah, I should have pressed them to stay a little bit longer, but it would have been a tough year because that 2022 was a really weird year where the society's coming back online and money was kind of weird. So I really got it out at the perfect time. So now the big thing is they raised the interest rates, inflation has hit, so the rent is through the roof everywhere. I mean, what I rented that house for wouldn't pay for a 1-bedroom apartment. That's how bad it is in Southern California right now. So I definitely make enough revenue to get back into a home. But if there was ever a bounce in the economy, I could be back out on my feet again, right? So yeah, so I'm just waiting for things to stabilize a little bit. I got stable gigs, so I'm also learning a ton of new stuff, which I'm going to start applying. And of course, I'm writing film. But Hollywood's all wonky. Hollywood is so screwed up right now that giants in the industry are just walking away from it. It's just so sad. And I mean, most people who are in it who've either been in it and, have proven records, gigantic portfolios. They're coming out and teaching at colleges now because at least you get some retirement package with that. And I would probably teach at a college full time, but I don't have a degree. And so I'd have to go back to get my educational degree to be able to go in and do it. But once you get into a school, unless it's a really eccentric art school, they'll force those goddamn medical regimens on you and just bullshit. So they can end your career in 2 seconds. I've got friends of mine that even though they went along with it, they still lost their jobs forever. So I used to teach at 2 different colleges regularly throughout a year. And after 2020 to 2022, my friends don't even work there anymore. And so I could probably guess lecture, I guess, but that, it's a whole afternoon. I think I make $250. But it's fascinating. I just go in with sort of what I think is kind of average knowledge about the video game industry, film industry, writing, virtual reality, that kind of stuff, and engineering of any kind. And these kids are just panting for information. It's like, man, are these kids being taught anything? I mean, like what I'm saying should almost bore some people, but man, these kids will come in tired on a Saturday or whatever, or after hours. Like I used to teach VR at Chapman University. And we'd start around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're just panting for real hands-on experience knowledge about how the industry works in those areas, filming a VR movie versus filming a sort of Presidium-based film. But anyway, I wanted my backyard back as well. The other one I have to be careful with in Southern California, just as a footnote to that comment, is I have to get a home that has enough space between the other homes that when I smoke a stick at night, I don't get, sorry, emergency vehicles going by. I don't get called on because a buddy of mine owns a different lounge, very wealthy man, has a nice, beautiful home in Newport. But because Newport, California, packs this houses so close to each other, these multi-million-dollar homes, he smoked a stick, I guess, at like 4 a.m, and the cops came and said the neighbors complain, you got to put that thing out. Imagine that. Pay $4 million for a house and you can't smoke in your backyard. Woo. That's one good thing about HB, Huntington Beach, is that this is sort of like a little Wild West, which is why when I'm recording a show at any one point in time, you'll hear hot rods going through this parking lot. And we're talking old school 30s, 40s hot rods with exposed engines on the outside. You can't even cover it up. Big blowers on top, and they'll come by, plus all the big Harleys and motorcycles, and plus all the glass-packed mufflers that are out there today. But I want to talk about another space-related thing. Thank you for entertaining my digression. I get these comments, and I have very close friends of mine who I love to death and respect with all my heart and soul. And I'll start talking about the fact that, because, what it'll be is that friend's in the room, and then someone else asks me, oh, you got a YouTube show? What do you cover? And I'll say, well, I do like moon missions. I do a bunch of stuff, right? It's really hard to describe Deep Thoughts Radio. It's really about having a deep thought more than any one specific subject. But I'll start mentioning, traveling in space and how I, have my own opinions about this. And a friend of mine will say, and a bunch of you say this in the comments section, I want to kind of have a conversation with you. The whole subject of space doesn't exist at all. I did an episode, which I think is the most revolutionary episode on the internet about whether or not space exists. And I'm just going to give you the footnotes. You should go watch it. It says, I think it's called Does Space Exist? And I think I recently mentioned this maybe like 4 or 5 episodes back. So if you remember me, saying this, I do apologize for the repetition. But I have friends that have, the combined years of experience would be in the hundreds of years, but 2 very close friends of mine, at least, that are legends in the effects business in the space genre. Okay. They were working on Star Trek, Next Generation, and all the other Star Treks moving up. One of my buddies did the intro to Enterprise. The whole montage intro where there's actually spaceships flying through, whatever. But they've got gold statues because of this, right? And I happened to share a radio show with one of them, who's one of my best friends. And I said, have you ever thought about the fact that you never dream about being in space? You just don't. I have digested, thousands of hours of Star Trek, Star Wars, all these other space shows, and I never went to bed that night and dreamed about suddenly being on the Star Trek Enterprise. But I'll play a stupid video game on my computer, or on my phone, it's like totally fictitious, weird world, and I'll dream that damn thing all night long. Okay. Not once in my entire life, after watching 2001: A Space Odyssey probably 50 times, every single Star Trek episode 5, 10 times a piece, I never had a dream about being on one of those ships and looking out the window and space is out there. What? So my buddy Kyle, he goes into work the next day and they're working on Battlestar Galactica. Okay. And he says to everybody, he goes, hey, everybody, question. He said the room he was in had 8 people in there. Again, every single person in that room probably had 10 to 20 years experience at the time. He said, have any of you ever gone home and had a dream about being in any of the movies or even the genre of space? And you have to understand, these people pull 14 to 18-hour shifts at times, right? He said the whole room just all looked at each other and everyone goes, they're waiting for someone to say yes. And everybody said no. Now, truth be told, I don't think I've ever dreamed about being in Paris. I don't think I've ever dreamed about being in Russia, South America, Africa. Never have. Doesn't mean those places don't exist. But the difference with this is this is something that the brain that I have between my 2 ears is very interested in. When you are controlling shot after shot after shot of spaceships, fake planets, and this is your whole world, to never ever dream about it just seems impossible. One of you said, do you think, meteorites and asteroids and comets and those things are there to forbid man from leaving this place we're at? And it's like, well, you know what? That would be sort of the ice wall for someone who's, a globe believer, whereas the flat earth people believe it's the ice barrier around the outside edge, right? So both realms, no matter which one you believe, seems to have this formidable layer you can't get through, the vacuum of space, because we won't build any ether-based engines. We won't even let the academic world go in that direction anymore. And everyone's too damn stupid to read a book and go, oh shit, that makes sense, right? A book from the 1800s. I'm just not knee-jerk about it because I do look up at the sky and I see a bed of stars. I go to Havasu and I see the Milky Way. I go to Kansas, I see the Milky Way. Sometimes ridiculously huge in the sky. I mean, it is a mind sex situation when you are sitting in Havasu. When I went to Copper Cove, the famous Copper Cove in Havasu, I had just arrived. My buddy picks me up on the boat. It's a tri-tune boat. And we're playing Led Zeppelin, and he's got Jaeger bombs we're doing at the time. Ooh. So I'm getting a little on the tipsy side. I never get drunk. But I'm standing on the edge of this boat, and my vista is a thin layer of the landscape. It expands on both sides because you have mountains, they don't have mountains, but little hills on the side of Copper Cove. But I have glass, undisturbed water in front of me, right? And then the sky. And I have the Milky Way doing a zipper right down the center of the sky. And then it reflects perfectly on the water underneath me. And I stand just like Titanic, right? I stood on the edge of the tri-tune, so I couldn't see the boat. And for that moment, I was floating in space with this word band around me. And, okay, if it doesn't exist, then you need another name for that bed of sparkly shit up there, right? We don't have to by any means believe that we're in a galaxy that's the spiral galaxy. All those pictures of galaxies, how come I've never seen one through a lens before? I've never seen that. Have you? Have you literally bought a telescope, put it in your backyard, look out somewhere and see one of those spiral things out there? Have you ever seen that? I never saw that. I've gone to events at the Griffith Observatory where I saw Jupiter, right? They didn't say, come back on Tuesday, we're going to have a galaxy in here. So I don't know if I buy any of that crap. But do I think that if I had a balloon, like the Picard guy, excuse me, which I'm not even sure that dude was real, but the Picard story is this dude in the Gilded Era who built a balloon. It was more like a vehicle that on one side was black, on one side was reflective, and his plan was to put, the reflective side towards the sun and the black side towards the colder side, unlit side, and he screwed it up and supposedly was spinning the whole way up, and he thought he saw a flat disc with upturned edges. But forget that story. Do I think if I got in a vehicle that was, say, one of my ether-based engines and I just kept going up and up and up, do I think I would bump into a firmament dome? I don't know. That thing's moving somehow. Why would it move at all? That's the other weird thing. Why would it move? I can understand the sun and the moon moving in other alternate models, but why would the stars move at all? They do. They spin in circles, right? We know we got Orion in the sky in the wintertime here in California. Got the North Star in the northern hemisphere, and we got the cross down in the southern hemisphere. For me, that's a kind of an interesting conversation off to the side. What I'm trying to do with the latest episodes is debate their claims with their science and their paradigms. What I think is very ironic about being alive inside of a human body, which I'm pretty sure, if you can hear my voice, that's where you are right now, is that we know we're sort of here until we pass away, until our body expires and releases the soul back into its kind of light, for the lack of a better analogy, light-based form. And light, I don't think we're talking about photons. We're talking about your pure goodness of what you really are, right? It's the fact that you got into a body that gave you context to ever be negative, right? But the reason why I think we debate these space-based stories is that we want our brains to be free, right? Set the mind free, right? Open your mind to me. Turn on the reactor. And we're here for such a short little journey, man. We are here. So there's two different philosophies about being in a place for a short period of time. You either go on vacation to a place you don't think you're ever going to return, so you start all the bar fights you possibly can. You do all the destruction you can because it ain't your world. You know, you're going back to your house. Or you flip the script and you apply your intelligence and you say, well, you know what? I'm only here for a short period of time, so let's try to do nothing but good stuff. You know, it's not about your legacy. It's kind of cool that if you help people, they might mention your name a little bit later. All right, that's cool. If that fuels the conversation to re-educate what they got from you to a new human being, that's what it's really about. You know, they say, oh, my uncle was really cool. And then the friend goes, well, why was your uncle cool? Because he taught me this, or my aunt taught me that, or my grandma taught me that, grandpa, whatever it is. We have people that are considered sort of famous in the world, and 98% of them are just the people that shouldn't be famous. But there's a good 2% slice out there we're still allowed to know about. And they're inspiring souls. They did something that it was against all odds, and that's what movies do, right? They talk about the heroes. Film and story is all about fake it till you make it to society. That's why Robert McKee, who wrote the book story, scratch that, reverse it. He opens his lecture and says that story is the most important thing to mankind. I mentioned this recently, and it is. It is because society wants to aspire to a better world that we have people like Gene Roddenberry creating Star Trek to say, look, this is what it could be. I don't think it was ever mentioned in the first 3 years of Star Trek in the 60s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Picard that had brought he had broke the Prime Directive, and he brought someone up to the ship. I think it was the one where they were trying to hide in an observational cave and screwed it up. And Picard kept getting worshipped like a god. But a woman got injured. They brought her up and fixed her. And then they toured her around the ship. And of course, her mind's just all over the ground being blown, right? And she goes, well, what do you do for money? And he says, well, we really don't have money here. So Gene Roddenberry, who was, I think, probably passed by the time that episode was actually created, he had asserted this potential that we could be. And I think that the idea that, NASA is nothing more than a piece of paper in some filing cabinet somewhere, proverbially, right? It is a corporation somewhere. Same with JPL, same with all this stuff. Now, if you take every single employee that is a part of that organization and you say, okay, are these good people or are these bad people? Well, most of them are, I think, predominantly the majority of the employees believe everything they've been told. And, their paychecks getting paid. They have families. Hopefully make a lot of money to the point where they can send their kids to college to be good kids. Hopefully they're engaged with their children. make them nerds for a little while so they have good respect for other human beings. And then there's that tiny film that's on the top, that layer of scum that is actually manipulating everything and potentially, it's debatable. Did you waste your life if you join these organizations? Did you really affect change? Did you really improve humanity? Because that's kind of all we're here to do, right? As far as I can tell. You know, good teachers are some of the most incredible heroes on planet Earth. A buddy of mine, who's a very well-known comedian, actor in the UK, he always told me, he said, you know, when I was young, he said, a professor was worshipped more than a rock star. And he goes, when that threshold flipped and professors were barely ever mentioned, but a rock star was the hero, he goes, that's when I saw the decline of my country. Oh man, I never would have thought about that. But one only needs to study Stephen W. Hawking from Cambridge University to know how bad tenure professors can be. They also pump stupid paleontology and various ridiculous false paradigms of science to manipulate the world. They get a call from the Queen and say, hey, the coal miners just held England hostage, so make CO2 and carbon the worst thing in the world. You got 30 years to get this thing going. It was Rutger Hauer made a movie in 1993 about the flooded out London because of climate change. 1993, man. They were on this. I think that if we were to say, you know, let's go to an idealistic world and say that we weren't being resisted by anyone, meaning we got rid of all the douchebags in the world. And the healing process has begun, as they used to say. And we are now we're trying to create plans and programs to get the entire world educated. Is that the solution? Well, kinda. It is. But we have some localization problems with those theories. It's the burden of command, right? Being God is not a job you really want. Now, I just said in a previous episode, the Phoenix Project, or Project Phoenix, right, that we have people around the world that are in different eras of education and awareness. And so do we go to the Peruvian jungles and say, okay, all you guys painted red that have never seen a TV, it's important that you know how to program in Python. It's, hey, African tribe that is completely happy, you know, choosing your partners by how high you can jump. It's important that you know big machine learning, neural networks. Is it? Obviously, the answer is no. I made a ridiculous analogy on purpose. So, the idea would be to leave people alone, the Republic, do no harm, common law approach to everything. And I guess with first world countries, you have to kind of establish, well, who's going to decide how your country is going to be? Because if you share a country together, America has 50 states, right? 2 that aren't connected to the main continent, right? Actually, it's not true, but I mean, not connected to the borders of the main, so Alaska's kind of out there. Maybe Hawaii wants to go back to a more Tongan, Samoan, Polynesian route. Whereas Alaska is like, well, we have a whole different world we live in. We have 6 months of this and 6 months of that in the sky. It's totally different. And we have things you don't have. And so we really want to be kind of left alone. If you want to route a little pipe up to the northern part of Alaska to pump oil out, well, just be careful of the environment. Once you develop some better technology, so you don't have to tear everything to smithereens every time you do that kind of thing. Why are you still using oil in the first place? Oh, that's right, because you pumped it out of the ground. If you don't keep pumping it out of the ground, it'll start coming out of the ground. But what is going to be the standard? What was the standard in America in the 50s with what you had to do for a living to pay all your bills? It was a single income household until pretty much we screwed it up in the 70s. Where we convinced women that if they didn't work for the man, they were a sucker. It's like, that's a funny little thing. The irony in that stupidity is unbelievable. So fixing this place is a very, very difficult responsibility. And of course, Pakistan doesn't want to do what America does, not because they don't like us, but because we just don't even know anything about their world. And they don't know anything about our world. The 6 tribal men that just saw a globe for the very first time, that didn't know how big the United States was, didn't know they were surrounded by oceans. Very interesting. Have you ever been, this is sort of related to, again, the space programs being responsible for augmenting your mind out of the cloud of false paradigms and complete money laundering truth, right? Have you ever had something in your life where you initially started doing it and it just kicked your ass, man? It was like, whatever it was, it seemed like there were so many moving parts to whatever this thing was that you were doing, a task, perhaps building something, sorting out something in your brain. And it was like, I'll never figure this out. That's like me with Android coding in the first month, because there was no documentation for Kotlin that was accurate. Eventually, you work on it and you work on it. These are my other lessons about becoming creative and using software and what you got to do to become a grandmaster in this stuff. Everything will kick your ass for a certain amount of time. And then there's this sort of balance point when you're functional. Meaning every day you come to work, you're not really dealing with an obstacle you can't get through, but you're not exactly as fast as you could be. And then you start ramping up your speed with whatever you're doing. Now, all of a sudden, your brain has manufactured synapses that allow you to have a more complex thought in your brain, right? And you go potentially 5-10 years at that level, just getting better and better and better, to the point where you're the drunken master, as I call it. You can be drunk and you're fighting someone over here with your left hand. You're drinking sips on the old Virtual Fighter game. You had the drunken master character, which was a great analogy for life. You're so damn good. You don't have to think about it. But then something magical happens, and it's a different time span for every single discipline that you're going to do, and it's different for you than it is for me. But you suddenly become a master. You're not a grandmaster yet, but you're a master at it. You're no longer an apprentice. And all of a sudden now you can put style in what you're doing. A little bit more than everybody else at your stage. You move past that. And then there's this supreme level where you get to a grandmaster level. And it depends on how laborious that art is that you're doing, or whatever you're doing, as to how many years you've got as a grandmaster. If you could do it till you're 90, maybe you got 30 more years as a grandmaster. But if it's something really physical that you can't do unless you have a super strong, healthy young body, like the sports guys, right? You're only grandmaster for maybe 5 years. Then you blow out your elbow, you get injured or whatever, and you're out. And hopefully you have a good retirement package based on your overpaid contract. I think that anytime you can exert pressure on your brain and have a deep thought, you're manufacturing neurons. That's the best part about it. You could be lost in a subject, feel the truth of it, not be able to sort it out because you need time to get in everyone else's opinion and then form your own opinion. You might need to learn some stuff and study some stuff. And because so much of the education is already indoctrinated away from the truth, you might have to conduct some experiments of your own to figure it out, right? Or just listen to your soul, which usually knows the truth no matter what, if you know the mechanical nature of its truth. And then at some point, a lot of stuff in your life will start coming together. It can be actually extremely overwhelming once you start renegotiating the most basic of basic things to the most advanced thoughts you've ever had in your life. Any subject matter that can nail your foot to the ground to pay attention. For a lot of you, it is the space stuff, and it's for me too. It's one of these things. I always told you guys, if you ever feel like you're not a great communicator, you have feelings that you are unable to articulate either in speech or in certain written word, write poetry. Godel Escher Bach. It's a great book that they don't even publish anymore, but it was about Godel, who was a poet, Escher, who was a mathematician artist, and Bach, the musician. And this guy wrote a book showing you that sort of my theory of the absolute mind. If you want to start getting to the samurai absolute mind, you need these three hemispheres to come together at a minimum to start giving your brain a three-dimensional view of all the data, as opposed to this linear trough being shoved down your throat from the media that you consume on your phone and TVs. Or the regurgitated crap from your neighbor, which is just basically a boiled down, diluted version of what's on TV. You know, the military has a huge problem on their hands that they've had forever. And it has to do with the fact that when soldiers go to war during a media-intense society, which would be 1990 and up with Desert Storm, you have folks that will be engaged in a combat, and it was gnarly. Whatever happened, it was gnarly, right? I got friends that were in war from 03 to 11. And one of my buddies said, you know, I was in the mess hall at a different camp, like one of these Camp Wakanda places. And he goes, I suddenly watched, I think it was CNN, and they showed a battle we were in a year ago. And they said on the news, fake news, that it was today. And then they lied about all the casualties and everything. And I think what it was is we had more casualties than they were reporting, and it wasn't considered a victory. We kind of pulled it out, as it were, but the entire tense of the moment was completely shifted. So when you go in and you really see any real action, you'll come out and find out that it was all reported differently. Or imagine being, that guy rotated around the theater of war for 1 year, but imagine he got his papers to go home the day after that event was over and he healed up, right? He comes home and he's sitting in his living room in Toledo, Ohio or whatever, and he sees a battle he was in a year ago being presented on the news like it happened today or yesterday. When you create these false paradigms with the space programs, you have an isolated group of nerds who are willing to lie to get false status. But there's only a couple dozen of them. No problem. Some people will sign their souls for a stick of candy. It is unbelievable. But when you create a theater of war with, all the, you sell your soul when you sign on to the military contract, they can do anything. You don't own your own life at that point. You really don't. And believe me, I was raised in the military till my early teens. I have utter respect for everybody in that situation. But now you've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers who see things and come home and it's reported differently. And what are you going to do with them? You can't nuke them all. I mean, you can't. You've got a liability out there. And so they got to pick and choose now. They probably do that kind of stuff a lot less than they used to. Maybe that mixes things up a little bit different. I should mention, I've got active duty, family members. So I'm always sending out my prayers constantly. Quite frankly, I send out my prayers for Ukraine every day, man. Both sides, even though I don't probably, I think most of the ones that we disagreed with natively, they're all gone. And the ones that are out there now dying are just, on both sides, are just innocent young men and older men now dying for no reason at all, so that a money laundering machine could go on at headquarters. It is like, the 7 layers of hell, Dante's Inferno or whatever. It would be interesting let me throw this one at you as we get sort of close to the end here. Imagine the space programs were completely believed. No one in the world was questioning the space programs. Imagine that. What would they be like if everyone believed everything? How much would they be incorporated into the fabric of society? I think the really short answer is extensively incorporated into the very Prussian patriotism, of a particular nation. They would do all kinds of fake stuff constantly and say, look how good we are. I mean, it's funny when you go to like Disneyland and there was a ride back in the 70s. A lot of you rode it. Disney World or Disneyland. It was called Mission to Mars. And it was a cool I don't know why they don't do this again with better CG. I mean, it would just be so much fun and better sort of LEDs and screens in the room. I think it would just be a line around the entire park to get into this thing. But you sat in this round room with this round screen right down at the base of this room, and that was your portal, and you went away from Earth, and Earth just shrank, and then you approached Mars, and Mars got bigger, and you landed on Mars, and they would use sound to give you this. I don't know if the chairs moved. I don't think they did, but maybe they did. Remind me if they did. But you would have a lot of that. But my reason for mentioning that was, imagine they could actually sell you a fake trip to Mars, man, right? You would get in something like Star Tours, which if you haven't been in Star Tours, it's a beautiful ride, man. You get inside and it holds about 30 people, and you're on like hydraulics, but you don't know it. And there's a screen in front of you. C-3PO nowadays is hosting your ride, and you see all this 3D CG, and they did a brilliant job. But imagine they absolutely use CG, and they just say, we're going to take you to Mars. And so what happens is you have this fake CG trip to Mars, and you go inside. They just simply tell you a story. Hey, we can't let you go outside because you'll die. You can't do EVA, spacesuit walks because we don't have suits that will really do this or that and protect against radiation. But you're going to be basically in the set of Total Recall. Inside some wild, rocky, configure. It's all Disneyland, right? And you get back in the ship, and you have like this giant journey home that takes 6 months or whatever. And then, sure, they could claim anything, right? Oh, we got these warp drives. We're gonna get you home, woof, just like Star Tours. But we don't believe, do we? We don't buy it. We want to go. I mean, is there anyone who watches this show that if you could step on the surface of the moon and not just fall through plasma or some crazy thing, if you could, would you do it? And if they could prove they could safely get you there and safely bring you home, would you want to hang out on a space station for a weekend? Well, of course, right? If you could go to Mars and chill out and look at a mountain that's 15 miles high, or look at those pyramids point blank, why wouldn't you? Wouldn't it be cool to look at a crater that's like, I don't know, miles and miles and miles long? I mean, like across and down. Just to eat breakfast and, oh my gosh, wow, there's a meteorite? That's cool, right? Of course, we want to believe that that'd be possible, right? So for everybody who thinks we're just pure naysayers, it's like, that's another problem we've got with people who observe us doing a lot of homework. I've often thought that I think it'd be a really good, I'll say it in this manner, because I view this as a situation I could be personally involved in. Imagine a script where you got a conspiracy guy like me making the videos I'm making. I'm naysaying all the space programs, but they need to get rid of me. And so what they do is they invite me on a trip to the ISS or some equivalent type of vehicle or some other fucking thing they've thought up, right? And they put you in the rocket and they kill you because it flies up in the air and explodes. Well, you don't care anymore. You're a free soul now going back to the central ether of the universe. And you're definitely gone out of the system. And oh man, they just roll all this like montage of how great you were as a person, but you're dead. Imagine that script. Then of course, I don't know, it'd be a brother or a girlfriend who would unravel the true nature of the conspiracy. But if you really do it right, it's like the dude's just like to serve, man. The dude's about to get on the ship towards the last act, and someone runs in, don't do it, it's all fake, So sadly, I will not be getting in any spaceships and go anywhere anytime soon. But I have to say, there was a thing back when I started my radio show in 2014. I mentioned this several times, but we'll meld that subject matter into this particular episode, which is friends of mine would say, aren't you afraid to say that stuff? And the answer was, well, yeah, kinda. Kinda. I'm not afraid of dying, so there's sort of like a prorated version of my fear in that realm. But I guess kinda, sure. You don't want them to hurt anyone else that you know, and they don't want you to be Seth Rich, right? But now it's no big deal, is it? The only thing that would make it a big deal, if like the whistleblower for Boeing, he was going to affect potentially America's GDP by telling what we think was probably the truth. And the guy suddenly commits suicide. Isn't that unbelievable? And everyone is just sitting around like it didn't happen. And when I say those kind of things, it's like, okay, if that guy had no relatives whatsoever and he's popped, and then they blame it on some suicide thing, which is just ridiculous. The guy was on a podcast like a week earlier and said, I am not suicidal. I think he posted on his one of his social media pages as well. But if you're close to that guy, you're his best friend, you're a family member, that's the group of people that needs to step in and say, okay, this was murder. This was murder, and you might get away with it, but I'm going to make sure that everyone understands that this relative of ours did not do this. This friend of ours didn't do this, right? But I like the idea that we are able to discuss this and we're able to put this on their channel. They're paying for the whole thing. I don't pay for YouTube. I've never paid a dime for you downloading a video and watching it. But if I built my own website, I'd be paying for it out my teeth, right? I'd have to sell boner pills, right? So I have this weird question in my mind. As long as we maintain sort of an intellectual perspective of the truth, is there a faction in this planet that's like, yeah, well, we don't want to get rid of all the people that can think for themselves. I mean, then we won't have a planet when we clean off everyone else off the surface of the planet, or maybe we'll get clean with them. These guys, we're going to tap them on the shoulder to go into some fallout, shelter or something like that before the D-Day happens. Maybe they're like, okay, well, we're really trying to push society to find out who's going to take a medical regimen that will kill them. Well, that's going to be a B arc from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Just get rid of those people. They self-eliminate and feel righteous doing so. And they will also guilt trip their closest friends to doing it. And so if they're weak-minded, they'll do it too because of the social pressure. We don't want those people in the world either, they say. And so it just cleans it all off, right? What we want left is the cream of the crop. The thinkers. I just watched a James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart movie called Oklahoma Kid. It was released in 1939. It's a fabulous film, really fun. It's all about the Oklahoma Sooners and the formation of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Nothing seriously historical. It's a funny movie. I mean, it's serious and funny at the same time. But James Cagney plays the Oklahoma Kid. Really weird role to see a gangster, a traditional gangster character play a cowboy. He does a great job. But there's a scene in the movie when they blew this whistle and the whole town runs out to claim land. And this local judge, who's already got his thing set up, he doesn't want any new land. He finds Cagney in the bar, who hilariously walked into this bar and he said, and the bartender's just he's an old man, he's trying to get his clothes on because he wants to go grab some land. And he's like, what's your best whiskey in this whole place, your best alcohol in the whole place? And the guy's like, oh, here's a bottle. It's 11-year-old scotch. And he goes, well, I'm more of a whiskey guy. Well, here's this. And he goes, okay. He goes, I'll just run the shop while you're gone. Okay, boom. The guy takes off. So the judge walks in and meets the Oklahoma Kid. Doesn't know his name. He just meets him. He says, why aren't you out there getting some land? You're a young man. You should go get some land. And the Oklahoma Kid's kind of like a renegade. He's like, man, I don't need to deal with society. He goes, I could love it or leave it, man. I'm just my own little spirit. I don't want to get involved with this. And he says something interesting. He goes, well, God, that's a real cynical attitude you have. Don't you believe in your country and the formation of the empire of the United States? We got to do these things. Otherwise, we're nobody, right? And he makes a really interesting little speech in a couple sentences. He says, well, he goes, what I learned when I was this high, he goes, I learned it this high. He goes, the strong take from the weak. And he goes, the smart take from the strong. Isn't that cool? So you have your meek, being absolutely subjugated by the strong. But your clever people, your smart people, your intelligent people can take from the strong. Because usually, again, you don't have a gluttonous top layer. The more intellectual you are, the less you need bullshit in your life. You need what you need, and that's it. And you want to obviously create a pipeline to keep getting food and water and shelter and that kind of stuff, and whatever tickles your brain. And I think that that's potentially who you are. You're trying to have deep thoughts. You're trying to parse all of these things that are barely mentioned in conversation. I think that I've said it 100 times. I'll say 100 times more. Deep thoughts is all about getting into your brain and saying, you've been having that thought, haven't you? Okay, so instead of me just saying, well, isn't that neat? You have that thought. Bye. We have an hour-long, 2-hour-long conversation on it. So you get to figure out whether or not that thought has any relevance to your life at all. You might get done with the halfway through the episode and go, yeah, you know what? I thought that was important with my life. Nope. Click off. Thanks for your view. But if it's something that really hits you deep, it's something that is infinite in your life, it's something you're going to think about from today to the last moment you're staring at your toes in bed before you go meet God, well, then it's probably important you continue having that conversation, developing it, pushing it, integrating it, or pulling it out of your life. It depends if it's positive or negative, right? I think what's fascinating about us is that I have this suspicion that, and I hope this is true on one level, that when we pass, right, we do that lift out of our body, which everybody who's ever had a near-death experience reports. Go see the movie Brainstorm if you want to see that portrayed in film beautifully. When your consciousness is pulling out of your body and you're joining the very fabric of truth, but you've been what we typically call a truther your whole life. You tend to be a good soul because what you want is the truth. Damn it, being hard to believe or not, you want that truth. You're willing to pay the price. You're willing to be ostracized. You're willing to not be able to get a job in aerospace because the truth is more important than that paycheck. The possession of your soul is more important than a paycheck where all these scumbags sell their souls and help the elite of the world. I mean, just damning themselves to the void, right? But now imagine you've been thinking your whole life, well, I think paleontology was bullshit. My whole life I believed in dinosaurs. And then when you do a thimble of research into paleontology, you're like, oh my God, I just believed a ton of crap my entire life. I mean, I saw Jurassic Park. It was awesome. The story was kind of shitty. They didn't follow Michael Crichton's original story, but still, velociraptors in the kitchen, man, that was tough. That was amazing, right? But now imagine we're ascending, and all we want to know is a few things, right? How did they really pull off those moon missions? Can I just take a break? Can I take a little sidestep and just be in the studio when they were filming it? Can I be in all the conference meetings they had to determine what was what and how they're going to pull it off, and then how they figure out all the other missions and everything? You've got stuff to do after you pass away if you're going to ingest any of this very specific truth. It's an infinite dot on an infinite dot, infinitely small, right, as the total perspective vortex says. However, it'll just be fun to get some of those answers. I don't know if I believe if that actually takes place, but I hope so. It's sort of like your other report card, right? You got the report card of whether or not you were a piece of shit or not, and then you got the report card of like, how much of it did I have right? How much, I tried my very best. God Almighty, I tried my best to stay consistent and to be real with what information I was given. Like, there's some people that decide things in life, you know them, and you and I may have done it in our lifetime, but we may not have, where you learned some bullshit and you were wrong and you repeated it. And then you learned you're wrong. You were wrong about that idea. And some people will hang on to that wrong idea, just like all the deniers of the hoax in general, right? But we can hang on to a false truth. And then it's going to be kind of a bummer. Like, I've got family members of mine that if there is any truth after this, they're going to regret pretty much the majority of their entire life because they've lost relationships with family members because they took on a political belief and couldn't let go of it. And they prioritized Hillary Clinton over their own child. That happened with my mom, right? She has literally prioritized the DNC over having a strong relationship with me. Hey, man, you want to talk about a person who puts his money where his mouth is? I can't do it, man. I just can't do it. If that's all you can talk about, and I've tried to coach her to, hey, why don't you just leave that shit in Oklahoma, man? Just leave that shit. And when you come visit me, you just ask me how my life is going. And never, ever, ever cross that line that the gentleman told me when I was 15. Don't talk about religion. Don't talk about politics. If you can't accept someone else's opinion that differs heavily from your own. Because this person can't. She can't do it. Sorry, man. You have to have integrity to be in my circle. You have to. It's funny. A buddy of mine used to have a get-together all the time. A smoke lounge get-together in his garage. And it was all tricked out like a really cool smoke lounge. And there was a story about, we have a guy named Greg, and he kept getting called G2. And I kept saying, well, what's up with the G2? And he says, oh, we used to have another Greg here. And he was first. And so we call him G1 and he's G2. All right. And everyone in this room is from different walks of life, different ages. I said, well, where's G1? And they said, well, we had to get rid of him. Kick him out. I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, he would come to this lounge. He's a married man. He's got a beautiful wife, beautiful kids. But he would talk about cheating on his wife all the time. And most of the guys in the room are married. If they're not married, they have the equivalent of a wife. And he said, we don't do that. This is Huntington Beach. This is where we live by common law more often than anything. A little rough around the edges, but whatever. It's a little scrappy around town, right? But they said and so we told him, you can do that with your life and we won't judge you much, but we don't want to hear about it. And he must have had a little bit of brandy or something they were drinking, but they said he got violent and he was a big guy. And it got to a point he pulled out a knife. And they got him settled down, and they basically, after he left, and got calmed down for the next day, of course, he was probably embarrassed at some level, hopefully. They basically said, you are no longer invited. Really sorry, dude. Now, he probably could have patched it up if he really wanted to, but he'd have to become a different man. He'd have to come in the room and say, I apologize, and you know what? I've had a chance to think about it, and you're actually correct. I shouldn't be doing this. And, maybe even say, look, I'm actually lying half the time. I'm just satisfying my ego that I actually have something on the side. I don't know. They thought it was real. That's when I knew I was in the right room. The right kind of guys. That was cool. And hopefully you have that same standard for your life. You don't have to confront anybody, risk your life and get yourself stabbed by some crazy guy, but just, like I always say, lighten up the contact with those individuals, let them fade away, maybe leave town when you normally hang out together just so you got an excuse. But you need to pick your circle carefully. This is a very short journey. Being alive is an extremely short journey as a human being. And the older you get, you find out how short it is. Even if you're really using every moment to do something amazing, according to you, it's a short journey, so don't screw it up. Stick to your guns. Stick to truth. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, right? Which I looked up that phrase the other day. A buddy of mine were like, what the hell does that mean? And it was that mines in the ocean were called torpedoes. And there was apparently an island. Some of you guys will know this story, and you're going to be laughing at me. I don't know the whole specificity of this, but there was an island they had to take, I think, and it had a body of water, and they knew it was full of a bunch of mines, and they called those torpedoes back in the day. And so they were like, we're taking that island no matter what. Damn, I think it was Civil War or something, right? Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And so it was that thing of like, we're going to get you no matter what, right? So stick to your guns in that with that conviction. I think you'll be very happy with your life. And yeah, you'll see people lie and steal and maybe have more material possessions at the end of the day than you have. Material possessions. But you'll have one possession that will be infinitely more valuable, and that's the ownership of your soul. Hopefully you dug the conversation. Wasn't quite sure what I was going to cover today. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Just know there's a new store, lots of new shirts, cheaper prices. I actually make some money off of it nowadays. I have picked the finest shirts I can get my hands on in terms of cotton and that kind of thing. So, hope you dig that. To the Patreon and PayPal people, thank you so much. You make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts.